Welcome to The Stumbling Spirit, contemplations on the path of resilience. Whether you realize it or not, you are resilient. It's your birthright. As you take in your next breath, know this truth. It's not only about your capacity to overcome difficult situations, but it's about your courage to do the necessary work to heal, learn, grow, and move forward. What you gain is invaluable wisdom. And it's through these hard stumbles in life that we often discover a new purpose that aligns with our spirit. My name is Fabio da Silva Fernandez, Reiki Master, Mindfulness Coach, and Mystical Explorer. Join me weekly as the Stumbling Spirit podcast highlights the lives of extraordinary people like you, sharing transformative stories and beneficial practices of resilience to guide you on your wellness journey. In 2010, 3 days before a life-altering motorcycle accident, occupational therapist Jaisa Sulit wrote these words in her journal. "Help me to stop judging so much. I want to live with more love." The impact of her crash compressed her spine, shattered vertebrae, and left her temporarily paralyzed from the waist down. In her memoir, Purpose and Paralysis, Jaisa describes her healing journey on various levels and how she became whole again. Here to talk about her book is author, mindfulness teacher, energy worker, and mountain climber, Jaisa Sulit. Hi, Jaisa. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Hi, Fabio. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Can you describe your life before your motorcycle accident?
The first thing that comes up is wearing a mask. On the outside, it looked like I was this bubbly, always happy, positive person with a lot of friends, success in career, and never a problem finding a romantic relationship. So much so that when my accident happened, somebody actually said, if this accident were to happen to anyone, I'm glad it went to Jaisa because she can get through this. And so while that person was right in that I did come through this, what nobody, including myself, knew was the amount of suffering under that mask. And yet a mask can only do so much, because as much as I tried to hide it from myself, there was enough peeking through the surface for me to write in that journal and ask for change.
I think you described in your book at one point that it was sort of a mask of smiling to the world, something to that effect, whereas internally it didn't really match what you were conveying externally. You weren't necessarily fulfilled in your life at that time prior to your accident. In your reflection, were you able to identify exactly what were the root causes to why you were feeling unfulfilled?
Well, Jaisa, before the accident, would have said, I don't have the right job, so let me switch. And I did. I left OT, became a teacher, left teaching, became an OT again, was going to leave OT to become a lawyer, but that summer the accident happened. Old Jaisa also would have said, I'm always meeting the wrong guys. And so every long-term relationship I was in, I was the one who ended it. There's always something wrong with this guy, so on to the next. And current Jaisa will say there was lack of fulfillment in relationships and career choice because I had no practice of being in relation to myself in a compassionate, kind, accepting way. Everything I did, all the self-help books I did was always to be better, always to change. No self-help book I picked up was about acceptance.
That's really powerful that you were able to identify that. So let's talk about the day of your accident. So this happened when you were learning how to ride a motorcycle. You were at a school. Your dad was there for support. And you ended up crashing and landing on your head. Can you describe what happened that day?
Yes. The context of me taking lessons stems from a daughter wanting to spend more time with her father. who is a biker. And so I dreamed of getting a bike so I can join my dad on his bike rides. And so that day, it was the first day on the motorcycle. I managed to get through the whole day from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And it was 20 minutes near the end of the first day of lessons. And I was tired. My hands were tired. And so that left hand that is on the clutch accidentally let go as I was making a left turn. And so for those who don't know, if you let go of the clutch while your other hand is still on the throttle, you will accelerate, which I did, into a curb. And I remember there was that moment of the motorcycle accelerating, and I was in shock. I didn't know what to do. So I actually chose to close my eyes and just surrender to what was about to happen. And I thought I was going to die. And next thing I know, I opened my eyes and I'm on the ground and I can't move my legs. But I also remember vividly the beautiful blue sky and even the green grass I was lying on. And I hear the teacher blowing the whistle, signaling for all the other students to stop their bikes, and the teacher coming to tell me that they would call the ambulance, and my dad running over and putting his hands on my legs. And I said, I can feel my legs. And I was relieved that I could feel my legs. And very soon the ambulance came, and it was when they put me on the stretcher that I started to feel intensifying pain. And that pain continued during the ambulance ride until I had an out of body or something. The pain stopped in the moment that I guess the consciousness part of me realized that, hey, even if cannot walk for the rest of my life, I still have the most important thing, and that's the ability to have relationships. And I don't know how long that realization went, but there was no pain in those moments. It was like a whisper from God, in that sense, an out of body experience, because it was a moment of connection to truth. And that changed the trajectory of my whole recovery.
I find that fascinating that in your moment of trauma that you were able to access that gratitude. What did you mean by that recognition that it's all about relationships?
Because I knew that, even if I'm wheelchair bound, in those moments of being in that wheelchair, unable to move my legs, I still had capacity for being in a relationship with something outside of myself, or even myself. So for me in those moments is I can be in a relationship with God. I can be in a relationship with my friends and my family. I can still have this, like I have my ability to speak. I'm still, I knew I didn't have a brain injury because my mind was still very much aware and I didn't lose consciousness. And for me, my full capacity to be in a meaningful relationship with anything was intact. But the interesting thing is I have never uttered those words. I have never experienced those thoughts. And that's why I knew it was divine, because it wasn't from my own personal learning in life. It was really a loving support from maybe my guides, maybe my ancestors. At that point in time, I just called it God. And I'm crying because I feel very loved.
I can sense the power of that moment for you. Your injury was quite serious. Your spinal cord was compressed by 60%. Your 12th thoracic vertebrae was shattered. You couldn't move your legs. You could feel your legs, but you couldn't move them. I'm wondering if it's accessible to you, whether you can describe the severity of your injuries and what was going through in your mind at that time when you realized the trauma, the physical trauma that you had experienced.
I think it was a slow realization coming out of an ignorance and naivete. Even as a neuro rehab OT, only working with folks surviving a stroke, I had never really worked much with folks with a spinal cord injury. And so it was a slow burn of this insight to, okay, I need a catheter. I can't pee on my own volition. I need help with a nurse and her quote unquote magic finger to have a bowel movement. I need two people to get up and transfer. It was about the 2 weeks that I stayed in acute care at Sunnybrook, and then just started to see, okay, here are my limitations and here are my supports that are in need. I think the moment when I realized really how severe it was, the first moment was when I woke up after surgery and I was in ICU, and the team came and asked me to move my legs. And thankfully, I was able to bend my knee with a lot of pain. And that was a relief for the team, I could tell, because before the surgery, there was no movement. And so there was some gratitude there, but also that beginning of, okay, this is all I can do. I had no movement in my feet. I couldn't lift my legs. But the relief I sensed in the post-op team was enough for me to tell all my visitors, I'll be running in a year. I'll be back to work in a year. And so that kind of ignorance around how long this recovery would take was good at that time.
You mentioned that you had surgery and it made all the difference because they were able to save your spine and your spinal cord. And they also had to do a bone graft. They had to take a piece of your hip to replace that 12th thoracic vertebra. And they also inserted 2 titanium rods. 2 days after your accident, you wrote in your journal about your strength being derived from faith, family, and friends. You had the presence of mind to be grateful and specifically write down the names of the people in your life that you were thankful for. You had a lot happening to you all at once. You touched upon it, but I just want to sort of delve a little bit deeper. Given everything that you had gone through physically and emotionally, what you were able to access to be able to have that moment of gratitude?
It was actually very easy for me to access gratitude because I am quite confident to say I probably had the most amount of visitors in a Toronto rehab hospital. So much so that people at Bridgepoint Health, they had to schedule out the visit so I wouldn't be overwhelmed because everybody wanted to come at the same time. And nurses at Sunnybrook and Toronto Lyndhurst would say, we've never seen this many flowers. And I was very distracted from my pain because I was just busy talking to all my friends and family every day. There was actually some fun in those 2 weeks in acute care. I've never been that busy in terms of my social life, compressed in a small amount of time. And I think I talk about it in the book. I did. It was a living funeral. It's not often you get to be showered with love in that kind of way where people will take time off work to immediately come and show you love.
You say it's a living funeral, but the sense that I have is that it was a living celebration of life. There's a different quality to saying that versus funeral. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but that's the sense that I just got as you spoke right now. What's interesting, though, about your choice of funeral is that there was a death that took place. There was a death of the person that you were prior to your accident. And whether you realized it or not at that time, you kind of set certain things in motion for an evolution of the person you are today. So I find that very powerful.
It's interesting you say that because I've never thought this before until now, and it makes me a little bit teary-eyed in that I have never taken time to grieve the ending of that Jaisa, which is kind of weird because one would think, well, good riddance. She didn't love herself. There was so much suffering there. But I really do love that person dearly. There's a lot of compassion for that person who suffered. And I wouldn't be doing this work if it weren't for her. So I'm very grateful that we can take this moment to name this beginning of grieving practice for that Jaisa who asked for this change to happen in her life.
And I think that Jaisa, just like with all people, I believe, we are always accessing different dimensions. So that dimension of Jaisa that you personified at that time was what was accessible to you. And after the accident, you were able to access other dimensions of Jaisa.
And as you're saying this, I find a continued integration of myself in this journey of being whole and remembering my wholeness, right?
Absolutely. When you were in hospital, I mean, let's face it, we're all human and we're not going to have the best of days. And despite the love and support that you got from family and friends, you had those moments where, because of your fear of pain, you weren't necessarily the nicest patient. You recognized this and you had this moment of self-awareness, and you wrote up a contract for yourself where in part you said, I promise I will never let fear of pain bring out the worst in me again. What happened that led up to this point?
Yes, one of the worst pains I had, more than breaking my back, was having a full bladder that I could not empty because of the spinal cord injury, on top of feeling anxiety because every time I pressed that red button for the call bell, it would immediately have been silenced by somebody at the nursing station. And so that fear of this pain getting worse and worse because people are ignoring my call bell. Later on, I learned it's because they were short staffed. All they could have done was at least get on the speaker and say, what do you need? Instead of silencing my call bell. That was probably one of the worst experiences in my life. And so because of that, in the weeks after, I never wanted to be left alone because I didn't trust that my call bell would be responded to when I needed to release my bladder. And that person I would always have with me is my mom. And the moment I realized that fear had taken over me was when one of my godmothers came to visit, and my mom was there too. And my mom asked, can I go get a coffee with her? Can she take a break and go to the cafeteria and have a coffee? And I said no. And that was the night I wrote in my journal. Because after she left, I realized, thank God there was enough awareness to realize how I was acting. And my godmother may have made a face when I said no. And maybe my mom made a face. I don't know. But maybe I felt the energy in the room between the three of us when I wouldn't let her leave me. But yeah, I was guided to write that contract. And it's interesting because as you asked me the question, I immediately thought of how that contract, I think, even though I wrote it 14 years ago, still continues on to today when I see how I am more likely to act in harmful ways towards my child, my 4-year-old, and my partner and my mom when I'm not taking care of myself and I'm in more pain. And then I'm afraid of more pain. And when I notice I'm getting into those experiences, I go back to being vigilant about my self-care.
Unless you have gone through being in hospital, or if you are a caregiver that is taking care of someone in hospital, I don't think people really realize the importance of having advocates around someone who is in the most vulnerable place. And so I can understand why you felt the way you did, because you were in excruciating pain. There are nurses that are changing shift all the time. They are relying on information that's in the chart. Sometimes things are written in the chart properly, other times they're misread. And just having an advocate there to be able to support you and speak on your behalf when maybe you're too tired, groggy, don't have the energy to talk, and having someone present there is so important. And you're so lucky because there were so many friends, so much family that were there to support you when you were at Bridgepoint. It's amazing that even though you had all those people around you, that in a gap of time, a short gap of time where no one was around, that you felt that you were at risk. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that and highlight that. And at the same time, that you're able to recognize the fact that maybe you weren't the best version of yourself. I can totally appreciate why you would think that way.
Thank you, Fabio.
I want to talk about a prayer that you were given by your friend Wendy. And this prayer said in part, since you, referring to God, since you created me from nothing, you can certainly recreate me. Fill me with the healing power of your spirit. May your life giving power flow into every cell of my body and into the depths of my soul. Mend what is broken. How important was and is faith in your healing journey?
I would say it's number one, even more than friends and family. I'd say it's more than friends and family because it's the foundation for how I relate to friends and family and myself. And when I say faith in God or faith in universe or faith in the great mystery, I'm including my spirit in that, my soul, which is more powerful than my physical body. And to have that faith that I'm a spirit first is like the number one foundational value driving my rehab, knowing that spiritual health is first. My spiritual needs are even more important than my emotional, mental, physical needs.
Let's talk about post op. So you have your surgery, and even though you could feel your legs and move your legs, your prognosis wasn't the most positive at that time. But you were able to go from a wheelchair to a walker, sometimes using both. You had to wear foot braces, orthotic shoes. You mentioned that you needed a catheter to empty your bladder and supplements to help with bowel movements. Your legs would spasm from time to time, and you dealt with chronic pain. So, this new reality obviously was really hard for you to accept, and you were depressed. Can you talk about what you went through in your healing journey in that very first year?
So the first year was like being in the honeymoon phase, where there's still that high from the hope of meeting your quote unquote rehab goals. And I quote that just because my goals were running again and be back to work within a year. And it was a honeymoon phase also because it was in the first year where I had significant amount of physical and functional progress. And it's also when everybody's still checking in on you. And so there was a lot of motivation, still ignorance in how long the recovery would be. And there was still the masks, the grateful mask, I'd say, the smiling mask because I was just grateful to be alive mask. And it was a real feeling. But little did I know that the journey within was yet to really begin. This was just like the crack, and I hadn't gotten the crack yet, right?
So, after that first year, you were well enough to go on vacation with your family to Cuba. And because of your physical limitations at that time, you were still feeling quite down. This was heightened when you saw that family members were dancing, and it was something that you used to love doing, but you couldn't do. And so when you returned from that trip, you decided to retreat and you go to a spa. You needed some time in solitude to reflect, and you were inspired to write. You ended up writing something entitled Celebrating Life with a Disability, which you ended up reading at Toronto City Hall on International Day for Persons with Disability. And it was picked up by a newspaper, and they wanted to record you saying your speech so that they could post it online on their website. How important was that moment for you, that recognition of celebrating your life despite your disability?
It's funny looking back to that point because I will say it definitely played a role in getting me out of the mud and having me continue to move forward with that positivity. But looking back from where I am today, I also see how, while it was enough to get me moving, I see now what was missing in those moments, and what was probably missing for the next 5 years was a capacity to grieve everything lost because of my disability. Yeah, it's interesting looking back to see how gratitude was so great, but I probably would have, no regrets in anything. It's always more clear looking back, but it's like, that learning of gratitude can be a mat you sweep grief under. And it's really only in the last few years that I'm realizing how grieving what I've lost is such a beautiful way to honor what I love. And I probably could have celebrated life with a disability, and in that same breath, shed some tears of grief for all the things I lost.
You shortly thereafter went to another spa in Toronto and you had a panic attack. You experienced excruciating pain, knots in your stomach, and your hands stiffened and spasmed. And you discover that this experience was rooted in your anxiety and fear of dying. Can you talk about that moment and the realization that you had?
Yeah, it was a very humbling experience because at that point in time, I had already done some training in mindfulness. And so I saw myself as a teacher of mindfulness. And so I remember the humbling moment when I was there with my hands like crab claws, which is apparently a common thing that happens when you're having an anxiety attack. And to be sitting there and have two paramedics look at me very calmly. I remember thinking, why aren't you reacting? I'm dying. Why are you being so calm? Like, I was very surprised that they were just so chill in my upcoming doom. And for the paramedic to say, just take some deep breaths. You're having an anxiety attack. I think my jaw dropped and I literally thought, I can't be having an anxiety attack. I'm a mindfulness teacher. Oh my gosh. So I had those thoughts while at the same time, I had enough humility to take those breaths, or maybe it was curiosity. And so I took those breaths, and I swear within a minute, my hands that were clawed into spasm started to relax. And then I remember, they're taking my vitals, and I was apparently okay, and they're going to leave. I was like, don't you want to take me to the hospital? They said, oh, no, you're fine. I can laugh at it now, but that day I was just floored at how I thought I was invincible to anxiety attacks as a mindfulness teacher.
During this period, over several months, you combined conventional and holistic approaches to your rehab and recovery. And one day you go in for a checkup and you see an orthopedic specialist who dismissed the alternative treatments that you were doing. At that time, you were doing things like reflexology, acupuncture, yoga, meditation. He said to you, they seem to be working because you believe it, but they are not really helping you. This made you really upset and you cried in your car. You ended up posting something on Facebook. A friend contacts you right away, calls you, and offers a different perspective, encourages you to continue on your own healing journey. Can you describe what happened to you and what you realized from that moment?
Yeah, up until that day, I just thought exactly what my parents and my parents' generation thought, which is doctors know best, especially if it's a white doctor. And I say that as a Filipino born in Canada, but of a lineage of 400 years of colonization and learning white supremacy. And so here's an old white doctor telling me I'm pretty much a fool for believing in these things. And so I felt like a fool because this doctor knows me more than myself. And I've never felt despair in my life. Never up till then, and never since then have I experienced what despair feels like. And for those who haven't felt despair, it's like you don't know where's north, and you don't even know what to do anymore. You don't know how to take the next step. Couldn't even turn on my car because I didn't know where to go because everything I believed in was debunked. And thank God I had a friend who reminded me that this guy doesn't know me. And so in those moments of talking to my girlfriend, I came back, or maybe not even came back, but I was able to move into a new way of being where I know what's working for me. And that's all that matters. And so I moved forward there, having a new sense of respect for what medicine works for me.
You mentioned earlier that you became a mindfulness teacher, and one of your introductions to mindfulness was taking Jon Kabat-Zinn's MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. Just for our listeners, if you could explain a little bit about what this 8-week program was about, and then describe the moment in which you had this "my life sucks" moment.
I've had a lot of those moments. This 8-week program created by Jon Kabat-Zinn is famous for being an evidence-based program with continued growing research supporting this curriculum that has participants in the course practicing daily this mindfulness, this way of tending to the moment with an open mind and an open heart. This course first started off in healthcare for folks with physical and emotional challenges. And so I was having one of those physical and emotional challenges as I was walking one day, experiencing more pain, thinking my life sucks. And those who practice mindfulness would say, okay, those are OTPs, which stand for opportunities to practice. And so I took that as an OTP moment, and I brought curious, accepting awareness to that moment. And I named it. This is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking my life sucks. I'm feeling emotions of anger, fear, and anxiety. I'm having sensations of, 6 out of 10 sharp pain in my ankles. And just in that naming, there's already that stepping into the observer. And in that stepping to the observer, there's also the observing of, oh, I have been walking for the last how many minutes without even taking a rest break. And oh, I've been walking without my ankle braces. Okay. Oh, and I haven't drank all morning. And so just that getting out of the cloud of being stuck in my thoughts, overwhelmed by emotions, this practice of mindfulness helped me to see myself more clearly. And in so doing, see that, okay, let's see what this experience would be like if I drank some water, had a rest break, and put on my ankle foot orthoses. And so this mindfulness has us being a scientist, a curious scientist, experimenting and observing the unfoldings of our experimenting in our life. And from that moment, and more moments like that, I personally have come to see what works for me to help me reduce my pain, minimize pain, improve my quality of movement so I can be my best self.
You were so inspired by that program that you ended up being an MBSR teacher. You took the training, you got the certification, and just 13 months after your accident, you returned to work as an occupational therapist and immediately starting teaching MBSR to patients as well as in other healthcare and academic settings. In 2015, you were so overworked, and you describe yourself as a mindless mindfulness teacher. Can you describe what was going on in your life at that point in time and what you did to reset?
Yes, as you said, I was busy teaching individuals, groups, schools, healthcare settings. And the moment I realized something had to change, it was a specific moment. I was in my car backing out, one hand on the wheel, the other hand holding a pizza slice, eating while backing up, with my earpiece in my ear as I did voice to text replying to an email. And I had that moment of stepping into the observer mode. And when I saw what I was doing while on my way to go teach mindfulness, I had a WTF moment. And I knew something had to change. So it was that summer that I left everything. The business I started, the business relationships, which is scary to leave when you're self-employed. But I left it all to move to Vancouver for what was supposed to be 1 year, but it became 2 full years where I was living on Beach Avenue in the west end of Vancouver, so that I could explore reprioritizing my rehab full time in engagement with nature. And so that included barefoot walking on the beach, walks through the forest, riding through Stanley Park every day on my bike, and everything else that comes with just working on my rehab again.
It was interesting when you wrote that you went from one extreme, being so busy, to having so much free time, and how that created suffering for you to slow everything down. And certain questions started emerging. And some of those questions related to your self-worth, your judgment of yourself. I'm wondering if you could describe what was going on in this moment in your life and what helped you get over your unworthiness or the thought of your unworthiness.
It was the fall, November, which is a gray, rainy period in Vancouver. Sunlight played a role in me feeling more depressed. But it was also 3 months in to moving to Vancouver. And so all the excitement of just moving had died down. And I was getting to a point where I was noticing my discomfort whenever people I would meet would ask, "What do you do?" And since I wasn't working, I didn't really know how to respond. And so for the first time in my life, I didn't know how to describe myself to people without the work I was doing. I wasn't teaching mindfulness anymore. I was just doing my rehab. And so I remember sitting on my bed. I had these big sliding doors facing the mountains in North Van, and thankfully had a practice of being aware of discomfort and having an opening to be curious about what it was. And so I went and got my journal and I just started writing. And I remember crying and crying and crying and just feeling into the discomfort. And then there was an aha moment. And that aha moment was, my love for myself is conditional. And it was so sad. And I was so angry at myself because I had only been loving myself because of what I do, how much I do. And now that I wasn't doing work, quote unquote work, income work, I didn't know how to love myself. And so I wrote another contract in those moments with the mountains as my witness, that my love for myself thereon would be unconditional, no matter what I do and don't do. And looking back, I feel very grateful to have intentionally brought in the mountains to be my witness, because I feel that intention continuing today.
You also wrote a poem called Anger, and you were inspired to write it after you had a session with a body talk practitioner. I'd like to read a stanza of this poem. Just grateful I'm alive. Just grateful I'm alive. Ah, yes, how gratitude got me through things. But wait, what's this inside me? In my heart, there is anger. In my heart, there are tears. I did not know my heart has been yearning to be heard, felt, held. I'm wondering if you can describe that anger that you were processing in that moment.
It's interesting because that was maybe several years after the accident. And it was the first time ever that I was acknowledging anger that the accident happened to me. Thanks to that body talk therapist who during that session, we were talking about anger. And I remember her saying, anger is good. Like she had to tell me anger is good. Because up until then, I thought anger was bad. Up until then, I had never showed anger to anybody in my life. I never told a friend I was upset. I never told my parents I was upset. I was never allowed to be upset, because being obedient means not being upset, especially being a Filipino woman who's Catholic. You have to be kind and grateful, and upset wasn't part of that type of expectation. And so that day, my body talk therapist was saying, anger is good. Anger is what inspires change. Anger is what motivates you. Anger is what started every revolution. And so it was because of that conversation she had with me that I had that gentle nudge to explore what I was feeling in my heart that day.
And that exploration or the invitation to explore that was really because of the somatic work that you were doing. So, in addition to the physiotherapy and the mindfulness, you were learning about other energetic and spiritual modalities. Part of that work was releasing emotional trauma that was trapped within your body. You immersed yourself in medical Qigong and Reiki. I'm wondering if you can describe that part of your journey and maybe highlight the most transformative moments that you had.
Yeah, for context, I'll tell listeners that before the accident, I was a judger of energy work. I was of the mindset, like many people in Western healthcare, oh, Reiki? Why don't you go get a university degree? Like, that was my judgment. And it was a bit because, here I am with 3 university degrees and somebody else is offering a service that didn't require 3 university degrees like me. There's a bit of a resentment there. So yeah, that I was coming in with this Newtonian mindset, like, oh, if you can't measure it and there's no research for it, I don't believe it. But I started to believe when different people on my rehab team who weren't in communication with each other were telling me the same thing that they were picking up in my body. I'm sensing something happened when you were 4. Has to do with your parents' finances. Did they go through bankruptcy? It was very specific type of trauma in my body that different people are picking up without me even saying anything about my family. That's just one example. I started to realize, what are people feeling? These stories in my body that have been there since I was born or even in vitro. Yeah, that was, a slow aha moment for me when I started to then realize maybe there is this thing called energy that I don't see, and it has something to do with emotions in my body. And so that was the first opening to energy. And so while I'm in Vancouver, I saw an ad for something called medical Qigong, and I was curious enough to do it. Took classes for a year. After a year, I realized I want to get trained in this. And so I signed up to get trained in medical Qigong. And on the first day of class, there's a welcome board that says, "Welcome to Chinese shamanic medicine." And I said, I didn't sign up for this. I was so scared at the word shamanic. Like, I was scared. And I said something. I was like, why is this course called this? I signed up for medical Qigong, not shamanic medicine. And the teacher said, in order to do this work, we have to understand its roots. And all medical Qigong doctors started in the foundations of spiritual work, shamanic work, working with the unseen. When we were each given like solution of vodka and water to imbue with life force energy, and we had to pick one name from a hat, and you wouldn't really know who this person is, but you had to imbue one solution for yourself and then one for this person. You had to go out into Stanley Park and you just be guided. See what calls out to you, which plant, which tree. And I finished making the one for myself, but I remember, okay, now I've got this name. I don't know who I picked, but I'm just going to listen and feel. And I felt called to a particular tree. And then you had to work with this tree. And then you learn through medical Qigong how to pull in energy through your hands and then to imbue what you're holding with that energy. And then you're working with the spirit of this tree as to when to stop. And then when you're done, communicating with the spirit of the tree as to the frequency and dosage. And I'm laughing because at the same time, I'm looking around me. Are people looking at me? Like, am I being judged? Like, I'm crazy. I look crazy here, but, still curious enough to engage in the practice. And then as I'm, communicating with the tree and getting this information on like, okay, this person will take it this many times a day for however long. Also getting the messages of what this medicine is for, whether it's grounding, confident, etc. And as I'm getting the message of what this energy will do for this person, I'm getting an idea of who this person might be for. I'm like, oh, I think this is going to be for this person. So we go back to class and we kind of reveal what everybody got. And I guess we'll call it potion that I created was exactly for who I thought it would be. And the person who then gave me what they made for me, I tasted what they made and I tasted what I made for myself. And even though everybody got the same solution, the ratio of vodka to water, we all noticed that the potions tasted differently. because of the energy being different from different plants. And so I share that not just because it really is mind-blowing for anybody who doesn't believe in energy, but it's also very inspiring in terms of our relationships with the more than human kin, whether it's flowers, grass, mushrooms, or trees. And to know that there is this communication, this supportive relationship that we can build with plants around us.
Thank you for sharing that. As a Reiki practitioner myself, I do know the presence and the power and the importance of energy. Also understand that our thoughts and intentions influence this energy. And although we each have our own energy fields, that sometimes our energy fields can be influenced by other energies that are external to us. There's a book called Messages in Water, and I can't really think of the author, but in that book, it talks about how thoughts and intentions can influence the molecules of water. And so, in the same way that you are creating these potions or elixirs just by connecting to the spirit of trees and plants, is very much that same idea of how thoughts and intentions can influence the structure of molecules and can also influence the health of things. So I wanted to also highlight that as well. One of the things that you talk about in the book is the importance of decolonization and indigenization of healthcare. What do you mean by that, and why is it important?
So thank you so much for asking this question that I'd say is really driving my current curiosities. I'll start off with saying I'll just use the word re-indigenization to also talk about decolonization and why I really feel called to share and inspire all of us in healthcare, wellness, well-being to re-indigenize the work we do is because the current state of healthcare in the Western world is one where the human being is disconnected. The indigenous view, and I'm also speaking as a Filipino who is doing a lot of re-indigenizing myself and reconnecting to my indigenous ancestors. The indigenous way of looking at our health and wellness is one where my body is a body that is connected in this moment to my whole lineage. So I'm speaking here with the presence of my ancestors, not just spiritually around me, but in my blood and bones as I speak. And so when I breathe, my ancestors are feeling my breath. The indigenous view also sees me not separate from this planet I walk on, from the trees outside my window who care for me, the water, the animals. This planet is ever so connected to my health. The indigenous view acknowledges exactly what we were talking about earlier: energy. Indigenous ways of healing and being well acknowledges the need for community. It also acknowledges the reality that life is uncomfortable, whereas capitalism, consumerism, all under colonial tactics, need us to be uncomfortable with discomfort so we continue to consume. It's colonialism that has us feeling like we are worthy when we work. I am worthy when I'm productive. And so I am not worthy of resting. To re-indigenize is to live in my whole body, to trust in the wisdom in my body. And in that way, this re-indigenizing and understanding how colonialism has had us all forget all of our indigenous roots, because all of our ancestors were indigenous to a place at one point in time. This re-indigenizing is simply having us coming back to our true selves, our authentic selves, so we can move with our whole body, with full expression. And some would call that liberation.
That's really powerful. You mentioned the ancestral lineage and how that makes up who we are today, both physically and spiritually. One of the things you talk about in relation to transformation is this idea of healing generational trauma. Can you describe how you identified this and the experiences you had to transmute that suffering?
So I never did psychotherapy before the accident. It was only after the accident, and I had insurance funding to work with a therapist that I started doing therapy regularly. And one would think that, okay, I'm going to do therapy now because I'm a person with disability, and everything we're going to talk about is going to be around being a person with disability and living with chronic pain. But no, majority of the stuff that came up in our sessions had to do with childhood stuff, and learning that a lot of that childhood stuff related to my parents' childhood stuff, which probably had to do with their grandparents' childhood stuff. And so when I finally started this decolonizing journey and learning about the impact of 400 years of Spanish colonization, American colonization, and how that impacts my lineage down to me, I began to see how not only compassion, this way of meeting my suffering, but holding the suffering of my parents and their parents, but also seeing how understanding how colonization has created this suffering, it deepened my compassion because there was no longer this blame on, oh, it's just my mom who's like this. Now I can see that, oh, all my aunties and uncles are like this, and all my friends are experiencing the same thing. Like, this is a cultural thing. And so my continued mindful self-compassion practice, but with the awareness of how colonization affect my lineage, but continued colonial tactics here on Turtle Island, makes my compassion work even more radical.
Part of that interconnectedness that you speak about in your book is even beyond ancestral lines. It's about the interconnectedness with everything and everyone from a place of compassion. I'm curious about that realization that you had. It was a moment where you realized that it's not about the self. This life journey is not about me. It's about all of us. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'd say there were so many moments, but if I could just share two, one would be the what I call mountaintop moments. And these mountaintop moments, they're called mountaintop moments because it's not every day you're on top of a mountain, but these are moments always happening only when I'm in retreat, like a 7-day retreat, eating vegetables, no distractions, but just practicing awareness, practicing compassion. And I feel very lucky to have been able to experience these moments where I would be more than my body. And it was always through the feeling of compassion. And I would be light. I would be expanding. I would be warm. I probably only felt that twice in my whole life, but enough to know that I am more than this body and I'm a part of something bigger. And I'm a drop in the ocean. I'm a spark of the divine. The second story I want to share is when me and my fellow colleagues in Chinese shamanic medicine had an open clinic where we brought in friends and family who were open to receiving our work. And we had a person on the table who was having pains in her gut. And so when we had her move into that, what arose as a source of that pain was in a past life, she was a warrior who had raped women along the way. And what was interesting is the learning from it was in one life, you may be the victim, but in a past life, you may have been the villain. And so that was very humbling for me in that moment. Oh, and I'll just say that when that person forgave herself in the past life, her pain went away. And that's when I became a believer of, okay, past lives. And two, I became humbled in this grand oneness of everything. I have been both villain and victim. And that helped me to heal that judgment I had towards who I perceived to be villains in this time. And just seeing how we're all suffering and we all deserve compassion, while in the same breath, also acknowledging that there is disproportionate suffering and there is a need to also address where there is more oppression. That said, these two stories helped me to at least extend my compassion to everything. And as my shamanic teacher told me, everything has light. Even the darkest demons have light. And so with that, everything can be given compassion to.
You mentioned the oneness of everything and that experience of oneness that you had. I think it's important to highlight because these were mystical experiences that you had, and they occurred during meditations. When your awareness expanded, you write in your book that you discovered, and I quote, "I am in the universe, yet the universe is in me." What do these experiences signify to you?
For me, it signifies and validates how spirit, acknowledging our spirituality as a foundational value driving our health and wellness, is so important, because those experiences showed me that even when I die, I still have that. And those experiences show me that it is that which chose my parents to experience the human body, the human life. And for what my takeaway has been, everything I'm experiencing as a human in this lifetime that I chose, that my spirit chose, that aspect of the divine, that spark of me chose, that is part of the whole, chose this, chose the suffering. I came for this kind of mentality. I chose my parents in this lineage to bring love, to bring compassion, so that that love and light that I am part of will continue to expand and grow. And so it's a real foundational perspective that shapes how we meet our daily sufferings, transform it, and continue to evolve as the universe is evolving and expanding, which we do every day as a human.
You start off your book with a story about how you were at a cafe with a couple of running friends, and they were talking about their upcoming marathon races. At a point in time when you needed 2 canes to walk, you were in a wheelchair, you were so overwhelmed by the conversation that you started to cry. Running had been an activity that you enjoyed very much. Now let's fast forward to 2017, and you climb a mountain in BC called Stawamus Chief Mountain. Can you describe that moment and what you thought when you reflected on your physical journey and that moment of accomplishment?
Yeah, climbing what some call the chief came with so many insights. One, that climbing is therapeutic, climbing is functional rehab. Two, I learned that nature really loves me, because there are times when I thought I was going to give up, that I just had no more places to be able to get grounding contact on each step. And I swear it felt like pieces of the rock were coming out for me to step on to keep going up. It was unbelievable. I was like, what is going on? I feel like this mountain is lifting me up and giving me new steps to go up. Like, it was really unbelievable. And so when I got to the top of that mountain, not only was those two insights the beginning of what is now Canadian Adaptive Climbing Society's therapeutic climbing program, which just finished its 14th season. But that top of the mountain insight was just another validation of how there is spirit in what we think is just a tree or a blade of grass, but there really is a relationship of love and support.
The tagline to your book is "From Chronic Pain to Universal Gain." What have you learned about physical pain and recovery?
I've learned that physical pain is something that can be shaped by our relationship to that pain. And that's where mindfulness and self-compassion have played a role, because without mindfulness and self-compassion, I would be fearing my pain. I'd be judging it. And I've learned that this fear and judging actually makes the pain worse. And research shows that, because pain is a neural physiological experience where when we react with fear, then the body's going to say, oh, we're under attack. Let's increase our sensitivity to the pain and send these pain signals even faster because we're under attack. So red alert, red alert. Let's be more sensitive. But with mindfulness, this acceptance, this knowing that this is not permanent, this self-compassion of being able to comfort and soothe and warm myself up and know I'm safe. These are all ways that let my brain know that I'm still safe. And that way of tending to myself and relating to the pain without ignoring, but instead, I'm here for you. I'm listening. I'm not ignoring. What can I do? It not only can prevent the pain from getting worse, but can actually turn down the notch from a 7 out of 10 to maybe a 6 out of 10. And then over time, 5 out of 10. And for some people, that's the difference between having your pain meds go up or at least just maintaining your dose for now.
What does resilience mean to you?
I think old Jaisa would have said, yeah, resilience is the ability to bounce back. Resiliency is the ability to keep on going and thriving through challenges. But current Jaisa would say differently, just because I know there are a lot of, especially us women, who are tired of being told we are resilient. Just ask some nurses who survived COVID, like, we're tired of being resilient. Or ask Black women, I'm tired of being resilient. And so I would say resilient now is not just this persevering through challenge, but there's now this standing up and creating boundaries now. Being resilient now comes with this sense of self-love and self-respect, where it's like, I'm human. I can only be resilient for so long. And so this has to stop. And so I think this new way of looking at resiliency acknowledges that we each have capacities as humans and that we need community. And so for me, resilience is more of like a real thing when we can talk about it as, I'm resilient because I have community. It's no longer, I'm resilient because I have overcome these challenges. And look, I can walk again and I'm rock climbing and I have a child and I'm so resilient. I think that's not really realistic anymore, but I can say I'm resilient because I come here now with all of my relationships. I'm here because of my friends, my family, the trees outside, the mountains that continue to, witness me from afar. I'm here because of my ancestors. I'm resilient because I have all of my relationships that I bring with me everywhere.
How can people reach you if they want to contact you? And how can they buy your book?
People can reach me through my public Instagram account called Decolonial Mama Love. And they can rent my book from the Toronto Public Library for free, or you can purchase it on Amazon.
And just to be clear, the name of your book is Purpose in Paralysis: From Chronic Pain to Universal Gain, and it is by Jaisa Sulit. Thank you, Jaisa, for joining me today. I really do appreciate you opening up and sharing your truth about your journey since your accident. And thank you for all of the wisdom that you imparted today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you and the work you do and you sharing these stories with others.
Thank you for listening to The Stumbling Spirit, Contemplations on the Path of Resilience. This is Fabio da Silva Fernandez. Join me again next week for another episode of transformative stories and beneficial practices to guide you on your wellness journey. If you wish, you can follow and DM me on Instagram at The Stumbling Spirit. Until next time, take a deep breath and another step forward on your path of resilience.